If you want to cook with live embers, watch this video. Okay, so you probably saw the most recent videos we dropped on the YouTube channel here. The first one was when Carlton and my buddy Jordan came up and we cooked that whole hog. We were doing a live whole hog cook with embers on the bottom of the cooker, and we made those embers with this machine called the EmberForge. And so we also just did the pork butt cook. And that's where I did 8 pork butts on the full-size Smokeslinger, and we fired it exactly the same way. We just managed our ember bed inside the Smokeslinger a little bit differently. We had embers spread evenly all the way across the bottom during that cook. And if you go back and watch, what's the one thing you don't see in that cook? You do not see flames on the bottom. You see just embers down there. They glow. Whenever a flame did pop up, it was a little bit of fat that was probably on fire, and I probably grabbed the rake right after I saw that flame and I just turned my coal bed over. That's all I did. I didn't have to do fire management like you do in like an offset smoker, or even if you're cooking some of the other multiple ways of firing up the Smokeslinger pit. So what we do in an ember cook, we're cooking with radiant heat, and that's the most important thing. One of the benefits of radiant heat cooking is we're almost getting that Argentine style cook, but we're doing it in like a enclosed box, basically. We're able to cook with radiant heat, not convective airflow. What that does is it lets that chunk of meat warm from basically the outside in before we build a crust on the outside. And that's going to give you an amazing texture that you can't get any other way. If we have flames inside the bottom of that pit, then we're moving a lot more airflow, because in order for wood to be on fire and have a flame, we have to be moving a lot more air. So the main mission of this piece of equipment is to produce embers for that cook. And the way we pull that off is we separate the flame from our cook, and we have this other device. We've got a top compartment here that we fill with wood, and as we fill that with wood, the wood combusts. We can have as big of flames as we want in this EmberForge. And as those things produce embers, they drop into the bottom. Sometimes you got to poke a little bit, but the embers fall down. What we're looking for there is embers that are probably like 1.5 inches or so, like 1 inch. And when you get those embers in your shovel, you're going to see they're glowing. They're not usually on fire. And so we can shovel those into the bottom of our Smokeslinger or any other pit, and we can sprinkle that shovel around, and we can pile those embers wherever we want the intensity of our heat. Most of the time, like on a whole hog cook you've seen, we kind of spread those embers out at the beginning of the cook, and then we bring them back in so that we can bring that belly and the loins up, and then we move them back out to finish at the end of the cook. Whereas the pork butt video we just did, I had an even bed of embers the entire cook. Now what's important about that is we don't want flame in a cook where we're doing embers, like a radiant heat cook. Whenever we get flames, the heat energy on that flame coming in contact with the bottom of your meat or whatever you're cooking, it's just raising that BTU energy up, higher up in the cooker physically. And so what happens is you'll actually build a crust underneath whatever it is you're cooking. Now my buddy Al Fragoni talks about this all the time on his channel. Al Fragoni, if you don't know who he is, he's one of the best known Argentina cooks in the United States right now. And in their method, they're cooking with radiant heat. And radiant heat warms from basically, I always say from the inside out, even though that's not entirely true. But we're trying to warm this big muscle piece of meat up, and we want to warm it all the way through, basically to the other side, before we start building bark or build a crust. And that's what embers do. If we keep that ember, if we have embers in the bottom of the unit, we can keep that ember coal bed down, and the lower it is, the less intense it is. We can increase distance, which will buy us time in the cook. Or if we wanted to go hotter faster, we could shrink that distance, and we could actually cook hotter and get done in a shorter amount of time. With hogs, pork butts, things like that, we want to be able to increase that distance so that we get a good steady radiant heat coming up, and it warms that muscle, that pork butt, all the way through, and then the fat cap magically starts turning into this awesome crust. Whereas like in another style of cooking, if you're on an offset, you won't get the benefit of that on your fat cap, because the fat cap is going to wind up being mushy and stuff like that. This fat cap actually renders all that fat as it's cooking, and then once it gets towards the end, you've almost got like this chicharron kind of a texture on the bottom of that fat cap. I'm gonna shout out Jordan here. That was good, wasn't it? He's sitting right there. So anyway, the EmberForge is built out of all 1/4-inch steel. And the one beautiful thing about this thing is we can replace every single component on this cooker, on this unit. I keep wanting to call it a cooker. But anyway, we can replace every single piece of this cooker over time. So this thing's gonna last you forever. It won't burn through because it's 1/4-inch, and that's what we build our fireboxes and everything else out of on big offsets. And the other thing, we bolt this thing together on purpose because we wanna have some expansion and contraction. Anytime you have something that burns this intense of heat, this is like a way hotter fire than you would have in like an offset firebox. Anytime you have that kind of heat, you're gonna have this thing called a heat affected zone at the edge of that weld. And it's usually from the toe of the weld, you go out a little bit. It's about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch typically, depending on the weld you're doing. And when you see that, that's where it's gonna crack. It's not gonna crack in the weld. It's gonna crack at the edge of that heat affected zone. That's the weakest place on the whole weld seam. And we wanna just get totally away from that. We just wanna be able to bolt this thing together, give it room to move around. My buddy Jeremy Yoder from Mad Scientist Barbecue used this at the Hondo Live Fire event, this unit. And he filled this compartment all the way to the brim with wood and we got pictures of flames coming out the top. This thing did not care. So you're not gonna tear this up. Well, with that, let's get into using this thing. Okay guys, before we light this thing up, I wanna show you one more thing here real quick. Inside the EmberForge, we've got this 1/4-inch thick set of slats here. Each slat is 1/4 of an inch thick, and it's set up like a tic-tac-toe grid. Now, the good thing to note is that you can pull this whole entire grid out of here. Like we said, every single piece on the entire EmberForge can be replaced. So if you burn through a slat, it's easy. There's just 2 different kinds of slats in here. You just say, I've got this one or that one. We'll send you out new slats, whatever. So, but what you do is you can pull these slats out and you can adjust the gap in between each of those slats. So like if you're like me, you're using bigger splits, then you can actually pull every other slat out and you can have like a 5-inch by 5-inch size hole. Now Dustin, when he designed this, that was the size he was running in the prototypes of this cooker, of this unit, and that worked the best for us. What we like the most about 5 inches is it seems like the embers that fall are typically half the size of whatever the grid space is. If you have like really small logs, you may want to, and you're using really small embers for some reason, I don't know why, but you are. You can actually use all of the slats in here, and you'll have like a 2-inch by 2-inch hole in each slot. So for this fire today, we're gonna go ahead and remove every other slat out of this thing, and I'm gonna put it all back together, and then we're gonna go ahead and build our fire with kindling. All right guys, so that's how we go ahead and reset this grid. Now I've got it set up for a 5-inch by 5-inch opening in between each slat. And like I said, as you're burning the wood up here, it's gonna turn into embers that are approximately half the size of whatever the grid size is. So you can control that and make them even bigger if you're trying to make, one of the things Dustin likes to do the most with this thing is he'll fire it up like the night before and he'll just make char logs. Like he'll just take a log and set it in there, get the logs where they're fully combusted, they're starting to turn black, and they're like burning, and then he'll shut this whole thing down and shut it off and go to bed, right? The next day when he gets up, those logs are choked out, but you've got char logs. Like you can basically make your own charcoal here simply by shutting it down, like shutting all the inlet dampers and shutting the smokestack damper as well. But in this case, we're making live embers for a cook. So I have no intention of shutting this thing down. We're just gonna make 1.5 inch or so and smaller, slightly larger maybe, embers for our cook. So what I like to do here is I'm gonna start with kindling today, which kindling is just a bunch of pieces that I got laying around from the splitting wood pile. And you can use whatever you want. Some other ways we've done this in the past is we've used the leftover logs like you saw in the beginning of the pork, the 8 pork butts video. I literally took 2 of those giant char logs out of here, and then I also reused the embers that were in the bottom door here from the last cook. I just relit everything. And then by the time that got going really big, I added a little bit of wood. You put your wood up here on top, you got big flames. The point is we're trying to get this wood up on top to be on fire. That's what we're looking for. And then the other way you could do it is like we did in the whole hog video. This thing was bare and empty. We just went ahead and started with a whole bag of charcoal. We just piled charcoal on the bottom, put some wood on it in a log cabin shaped pile, and then lit it and just let those flames go. Now, when you're lighting this thing, it's going to take it about a good hour, maybe an hour and a half. Longer is better to build up enough embers to start your cook. So we're going to go over that as we go along here. But for now, I'm going to build a fire structure. Okay guys, so now I've got kind of a fire structure built in here. Like I said, we're using kindling this time, and the way I'm holding my kindling up, since our grid is on 5-inch spacing, I just took some really skinny splits of hickory, and I just laid them in here like that. And then I just took some random pieces from the splitting wood pile, like bark and just some pieces of wood and junk like that. And that just made me a pretty even pile on there. And then I took, again, smaller splits, and I started building that up. And then we got bigger as we went up. Now what's going to happen, we want to build that fire up here, but that kindling is going to die out pretty quick. So if that happens and your kindling falls down, if you didn't build enough, don't panic. You can still use the torch to finish lighting. But the deal is that kindling seems to form a better pile of embers to start with than like big briquettes turning to dust. That's just kind of how I feel about it. So we're going to go ahead and get this thing lit up. And like I said, we're building a fire up here, not in the bottom this time, since we're using kindling. All right, guys, so we had our bed of kindling put down on the grate. You see that our grid spacing is set up for like 5x5 holes, which is what I want for this cook that I'm gonna do. And what we've got is that bed of kindling with a log cabin style fire structure on top of it. Now I always start with smaller splits to get lit faster. And once you get, like, the fire has to be in the top compartment. You can start with a fire in the bottom, but whenever you get that fire lit on the bottom, you gotta have some flames that are shooting up to the top. And a lot of times you gotta still light the top with the torch. Both ways are okay. In this case, I built the kindling on top of the grid, and we're going to just get that kindling lit, but we want to support it so that the kindling doesn't fall through the cracks in the base. So what I actually did is I took some little 1-inch looking splits that were about 12 inches long, and I just built, put gaps between them, and I've got those splits laid out. I took a bunch of random stuff from the wood splitting pile, and I put that across the top of that. And then I put a bigger size split, like an 1.5 to 2-inch size split on top, and I started building a log cabin structure on top of that. Then we take a torch and we just get that thing lit. You can use fire starters, whatever you prefer, but I like that Texas match. And so I aim the torch right at the base of the kindling. And what you're going to see there is as we light, we need to go sideways a little bit too. And we also want to just not aim that only at the kindling. We're going to aim that around and try to get the base of those logs that are up on top, because that's really what we're trying to get on fire here. Now, take your time. Don't get in a hurry. This is barbecue. We're just getting the fire lit, right? As those splits start to get burning on their own, then we're going to go ahead and we're going to prop this door mostly closed and leave the top door gapped just a little bit. We're going to open this air inlet up, and we're going to let that fire breathe. And in order to encourage it to breathe even heavier, we're going to leave that bottom door fully open. And the smokestack is also all the way open. We just want to get as much oxygen rising through this vertical chamber as we can. Once that upper fire is completely engulfed in flame, you might actually even hear a log roll over or something like that towards the front door. That's about the time where your coal bed, your kindling, has started to burn through, and you might even see a piece drop down. But by that time, you should see those logs in our original fire structure start to be almost entirely black. And now we've got a good fire base in there. So at that point, we're gonna start loading splits on top of that fire structure the same way. We're just gonna spread those out almost like a log cabin grid. You can put down 3 splits one way and then put down 3 splits the next way. And if you're feeling even more aggressive, put a couple more on top. And that's kind of how I do it. Once we get those splits on there, leave that top door open again, because now our fire is not gonna fall out on the ground. Go ahead and leave that top door open again, and you're gonna see this fire is really gonna start roaring. Once you get that fire big and going, you'll start to see flames creeping out the top of the door right here. When you start seeing flames coming out, that fire is seeking air, and that's what we want it to do. That means that we can close this door with confidence. You might even see flames coming out the stack pretty tall. It's pretty impressive, but we want to dial that back a little bit. Now, the EmberForge is designed to handle a super hot roaring fire in there, but it's not really necessary to get that big of a fire going in the top of this thing. Remember, we're looking for a consistent ember production, and also we don't want to work ourselves to death and burn up and waste a bunch of wood. So whenever you shut this door down, leave the top air inlet all the way open, leave your stack open, but on the bottom door, when you close it, we're gonna creep that air inlet down on the bottom. And this is where the EmberForge shines. I believe it shines way better than almost any other burn barrel type product you see on the market for creating embers. Basically, we're making charcoal. We want that charcoal to stay on fire, but we don't want that charcoal to completely burn into ash. So what we do is we choke back that bottom damper, and it's gonna minimize how much oxygen gets to that fire on the bottom. So basically, we're not gonna just like, when we drop embers, they're gonna stay lit, but it's gonna slow down the rate of consumption of those embers when they fall down. Now, in an hour from now, or 2 hours from now, when I come back to grab a shovel of embers out the bottom, I've got a good, healthy shovel full of coals. And you're gonna see that as we continue running this pit. For the most part right now, just remember, we just want to have a good, healthy fire in the top, and we want to make sure that we're just not glowing the panels on the side of the thing and shooting flames 8 foot in the air. Like, there's just no excuse for that. We're creating a steady ember rhythm here that we can continue to cook in our pit. So now we're going to go ahead and let this thing run for a little bit, and then we're going to start talking about how to use the embers. Okay guys, so now we've got ember production happening. Our fire is developed enough to where you actually start to see the logs on the bottom of that log cabin structure actually have they're like flaking apart and stuff like that. And periodically you even hear a piece fall down in the bottom. So that's what we're looking for. We've got some steady glowing embers falling in the bottom. And while we're maintaining this thing, we don't want to have a bunch of black smoke coming out the top. Like, you want to watch your smoke coming out the stack. Black smoke is an indicator that you're overfueling and you're wasting wood. Now, the other side of that coin is you have to keep enough wood burning in the top to maintain ember production for the rhythm that you're doing in your cook. For most applications, the full-size Smokeslinger and other pits like that are smaller. This is plenty. This is all we need. All right, guys, so now we're at the exciting part of this thing. We get to start putting coals in our pit. Now, the one thing you want to know is, like, I'm basing this on the full-size Smokeslinger, but this will work on any smoker that you would feed coal into. Full-size Smokeslinger is like a 24 by 48 direct heat cooker, and this is plenty to do like a 60-pound hog or so, so don't panic. But anyway, the thing you want to remember is that you want to have a steady ember rhythm, right? That means not just adding embers to your pit, but also the raking them and stuff like that. And you need to also remember we're not managing a fire, we're managing heat. That's what we're doing as we add that. So we're going to try to maintain a consistent heat content on whatever it is that we're cooking. Okay guys, so like the first thing I'm going to grab for whenever I'm doing a live fire cook, whether it's on the full-size Smokeslinger, the Mini, or some other kind of a device, is a good old shovel. Now this is like a flat nose shovel. This is my preference. I actually like this shovel a lot. There's some history in it, which makes it fun and cool. But the big thing is I like a short flat nose shovel because I can just do like this with one hand and I can grab a door with the other. And then when I need control of where the shovel's at, I can just grab it real quick. A longer handle's good too if you need to be farther away from like a really big fire, like cooking a whole cow, like we've done down at Alfregoni's event with Big Javi. Anyway, so that's kind of the scenario you're getting into with embers, is you need to safely move them. The next thing you want to make sure is that respect the wind, because like if you're out on the prairie and there's a bunch of tall grass and there's a red flag warning and all of that junk, be safe and responsible when using a device like this, so that you have a very short distance to travel to your pit. Make sure that you have easy access to get where the embers got to go, and if you need to, erect some kind of a wind barrier or some kind. But getting into actually where to put the embers in your pit. So there's a couple of different scenarios. When I'm doing like a whole hog like we did with Carlton and Jordan, you'll see that whenever we started this cook, we actually put our embers, when we shoveled them into the pit at the beginning of the cook, we actually had them mostly on the ends, right? Because we want to concentrate that heat load under the heaviest part of the meat. And that's going to be the shoulders and the hams is what that's going to be on a pig. And then as we continue to cook, then we're going to start raking those coals around and we're going to get them more even. And we're going to allow the center of that hog to heat up. And that's where like the belly and the loins and the ribs are. And it's a lot thinner. There's not as much meat density there. So we're going to take our time in that part, not overcook it too fast. And then once we get ready to finish this pig, those bacons and loins and stuff are going to shoot up in temp. So we're going to push those coals back out and just let nature take over from there. And we're going to finish those shoulders. Now, if we're doing like just a whole load of pork butts, then we're going to go ahead and spread it even like I did in the last video. So you're going to maintain a thinner coal bed, not as big of a pile, and you're going to keep that spread out evenly throughout the pit so that you can have the same temperature all the way across. Something you might notice is that we're managing heat here. If you notice in that pork butt video, the Smokeslinger is sitting right next to the EmberForge. And we've got a massive fire built in this EmberForge, and this thing heats my whole shop, right? So I had those butts away from the EmberForge a little bit. One way to fix that, if you want to have, if you're not limited on space, is you can move the units apart a little bit. But like I said, stay responsible with that. But in this case, because I'm under this hood, whenever the fan's running, I've got to keep them tight so I can keep the smoke out instead of in here choking me. So a couple other things we're going to do while we're managing this coal bed is you're going to have to use something like a rake. And this is like my favorite rake in the world for that. It's pretty broad. So if I want small pieces of embers fall through this, but big chunks, like if I accidentally put like a partially burned log or a big chunk that didn't like actually turn all the way to embers and it still has hard wood in it, I can actually rake that piece over and get it out of the way with this, but I'm not like micromanaging a bunch of ash or fine particles in there while I'm raking my coal bed around. And this, you can turn it sideways and use it, or you can use it straight up like this. Either way, you're going to be able to move that coal bed around easy in there. And another thing is, as like shoulders or butts or ribs or something you're mopping or a hog, as that fat starts rendering and falling down, big, like if you've got a leaky spot in a shoulder, let's say, and all the fat's coming out that one spot, it's all going to pile up right in one chunk on top of your coal bed. And so it's important to be able to break that up. Otherwise, I've actually seen, and it'll create kind of a cold spot if left alone, because it'll actually put out the surface of that spot in your coal bed. So all you got to do is just rake through it and push it back, and it'll tumble those coals over, and it'll put that cold side of the ember down at that point. And so then as we go along, we're going to set a timer of some kind because we need to manage by a rhythm. Now that rhythm that I like to set is, you can do 30 minutes, seems really good. I mean, you manage by beers, whatever you want to do. But we like to set a timer for 30 minutes. We don't have that long of a trip, and I'm hanging out here anyway. On 30 minutes, we're not going to do anything necessarily. We're just going to come observe. Things I'm looking for is cold spots where rendering fat has gotten down to my coal bed. I'm looking to see the condition of my coal bed, and it seems like about every 30 minutes, I wind up just lightly raking the coal bed. And then the next 30 minutes, I might sprinkle a little bit out of the bottom of here in certain spots to maintain the coal bed. Or another 30 minutes, I might add like 2 or 3 splits in here, depending on my ember production, what I'm looking for. But consistency is the key, because like what I said, when you're using something like this, you're not managing temperature, you're not managing a fire, you're managing heat content. And that's what's so important about this and why it's so fun to cook with, because it changes the game up a little bit, and it will definitely change your barbecue. You'll have like this whole leveled up feeling out of it. Okay guys, so now we're gonna talk about a few mistakes that I see people make whenever they're running embers in a pit, right? And especially feeding this thing with fuel. So as you go, you've established a rhythm, you're working that 30-minute thing. You know, you may have missed some time or whatever. Let's say it's 45 minutes, an hour. You come back and you're starting to see like, oh crap, my bed logs on the top section are actually starting to deteriorate enough that when I set logs on them, they might fall through and stuff like that. So how do we deal with that? Most people would overfuel it at that point. And the catch is like if you do that, you're gonna have this cause and effect scenario where in a few minutes, that thing is gonna be like really on fire. What I've noticed is that if you're feeding this thing seasoned wood that's plenty dry, that thing can get overfired, and then it will be shooting flames out the stack, you know, 2 or 3 foot tall. When that happens like that, you might turn into black smoke whenever you tighten this thing down, because those logs light fast is what happens. So another thing I see people do is that they feed feed partially lit logs into their cooker. And I'm going to take one out of here and show you what I'm talking about. Jordan said this was a good idea. He's over there sitting in a chair, taking it easy. So here's a partially lit log, and if you see there's flames on that log, and that's an issue. What happens is you don't want flames moving with your embers. You want to keep the ember size consistent, and you want to make sure that they're glowing. You don't want to have this big on fire in the bottom when you add that, because that causes a temperature spike. And then you'll wind up with black smoke. So another thing you need to do is you have to have conversion time. Like you don't want to run out of embers, right? And you need to stay on that rhythm, but you also need conversion time for these logs up here, not to just partially turn to charcoal, but to actually turn into embers and fall down. And so what you're gonna do is you're gonna use like a fire poker or something like that, and you're gonna go right through this front hole, and you're gonna be able to scrape those around and knock the embers loose from the logs that are up on top. But you wanna give those plenty of time to come up to and actually turn into embers as you cook. Okay guys, so one of the things that Dustin had in mind whenever he created the EmberForge is like, we always get questions from people that are wanting to cook an old school hog on the full-size Smokeslinger, suckling pigs, pork butts, ribs, chicken cooker, all of the above. And the thing is that there was not really a good way to do that just using bags of charcoal, because you get too much coal all at once and you light it and you've got such an intense bed of coals that it's just like you have to cook faster, like we talked about. So the EmberForge is a control tool. That's what this thing is. It's not a gimmick. And what it does is it brings that old school barbecue to your backyard, really. If I had to say it without feeling salesy, that's literally what happened. And I know that using this thing, and I think Jordan's sitting over there in a chair shaking his head.
I'm a believer.
I'm a believer, man, because like, I know my barbecue has changed using this tool. I really enjoy cooking this way, and you're gonna see a lot more of it coming from here. So anyway, I really appreciate you watching this video. If you haven't already, go check out the Smokeslinger Pit Owners group. You're gonna see a lot of content of me just dropping stuff in there, Dustin cooking with it, and other guys like Carlton Dudley and others that have it as well. And you're gonna have a lot of fun watching them. Eventually, you're probably gonna want one too. And until next time, keep your smoke thin and blue. We'll see you.